in the rolling hills of Austria, just 150 kilometers west of Vienna, lies a place whose stones have witnessed the unthinkable. Mauthausen. From the outside, it might appear as just another historical site, walls of granite, guard towers still standing against the sky, but behind those walls once unfolded one of the darkest chapters in human history. Over 200,000 people from across Europe were brought here, and more than half would never return. Surrounding this main camp was a vast network of over 40 subcamps, each with its own story of hardship, survival, and tragedy. This is not just a tale of the past. It is a reminder etched into the very ground, a call to remember so that such cruelty is never repeated. Mauthausen was more than a prison, it was an entire system designed to strip people of their freedom, dignity, and, for many, their lives. Yet, amid the suffering, there were moments of defiance, courage, and human resilience that continue to inspire us today. In this story, you will journey beyond the barbed wire, through the granite quarries where prisoners labored until their strength gave out, into the hidden tunnels where secret wartime projects were built under impossible conditions. You will see how a place meant to crush the human spirit became, for some, a final stand for dignity. You will meet the people, prisoners and liberators alike, whose actions turned silent stone into voices that still speak across the decades. This is not about sensationalizing pain or exploiting tragedy. It is about bearing witness. It is about learning from the courage of those who endured, about seeing history not as distant, but as a mirror we must never look away from. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, if you think the world should remember both the warnings and the hope hidden in history, then please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Every click helps us keep uncovering and sharing these important chapters of our shared past. Together, we can ensure that memory outlives forgetfulness. Stay with us as we step inside Mauthausen, its walls, its silence, and its truths, and uncover the human stories that history books can never fully capture. This is more than history. It is a testament, and it begins here. When Mauthausen first took shape, it was not yet the sprawling complex of fear it would later become. Perched high on a hill, its location was no accident. The surrounding land was rich with granite, a resource that the leaders of the Third Reich envisioned as the very foundation for their monumental building project, structures meant to last for centuries. To project power and permanence, the camp's earliest prisoners were brought here not only to be confined, but to serve as the labor force that would pull the stone from the earth. Day after day, they descended into the yawning quarries, the sound of chisels and hammers echoing off the rock walls, the dust clinging to their skin and clothes. Under the watchful eyes of guards stationed along the ridges, they hoisted massive granite blocks, some weighing more than their own bodies, and hauled them up the long, unforgiving steps carved into the quarry's side. The work was grueling, but it was only the beginning. As the war expanded, so too did the ambitions of those in power. The vast reserves of granite were no longer enough. The camp, with its captive workforce, became a perfect place to feed the increasingly desperate demands of a war machine that was turning towards secret and highly advanced weaponry. Deep beneath the hills and forests, new projects began to take shape. Underground facilities, hidden from the sky and far from prying eyes. These tunnels and chambers, carved out of the bedrock by hand, would house the production of weapons that existed at the very edge of wartime technology. What had once been the sound of stone being split and hauled now mingled with the clang of metal, the hiss of welding torches, and the low thrum of machinery. Prisoners who had once toiled under the open sky found themselves laboring in the dim, stale air of the underground factories. The work was relentless, the hours long, and the environment suffocating. Here, they assembled the parts for machines designed to alter the course of the conflict, jet aircraft faster than anything seen before, and the engines for rockets capable of striking from unimaginable distances. The irony was not lost on many. In these tunnels, people from nations across Europe were forced to build the very weapons that might one day be turned against their own homelands. The transformation of Mauthausen from a place of stone cutting to a hub of hidden industry was not sudden, but it was complete. Each expansion brought more prisoners, more work sites, and more demands. The surrounding subcamps grew in number and purpose, each feeding into the larger machinery of production. Guzan, one of the most notorious of these, became a center for manufacturing, its own underground systems sprawling beneath the countryside. The granite quarries still operated, but now they were only part of a much larger operation, an operation that drew its strength from secrecy, from the ability to move production deep below the surface where it could not be disrupted. For those inside, the change in work did not mean relief. If anything, the pressure intensified. Underground, the air was heavy and damp, the temperature constant but the sense of time lost. Artificial light replaced the sun, and the sounds of industry filled every corner. The labor was skilled in some cases, but there was no training, only the expectation that tasks be done quickly and without error. Mistakes were costly, not just in the eyes of the overseers, but in the toll they took on the workers themselves. Above ground, the camp's fortress-like appearance remained, its stone walls and towers unchanged, a silent sentinel over the transformation happening below. The contrast between what could be seen and what was hidden was stark. Visitors or inspectors shown the outer grounds might see the granite, the steps, the barracks, but not the network of tunnels and chambers where the real shift in purpose had occurred. This dual existence was deliberate, a way to maintain the appearance of one kind of camp while operating another entirely within its shadows. The expansion into weapons production tied Mauthausen even more deeply to the war's outcome. It was no longer just a site of imprisonment and labor for monumental architecture. It had become a cog in the most secretive and advanced sectors of the wartime economy. This connection meant increased oversight from higher authorities, more resources devoted to its operations, and a growing dependence on the camp's output. And yet, within this machinery, there remained the human stories of individuals who, despite the crushing nature of their circumstances, found ways to endure, to support one another, and in rare cases, to sabotage the very work they were forced to do. A misaligned component, a slightly altered measurement, a delay in assembly, small acts that, while dangerous, were sometimes the only form of resistance possible. These moments, invisible in the official records, were as much a part of Mauthausen's history as the granite blocks and the factory lines. The quarries and the underground tunnels now stand in silence, the echoes of their past carried only in memory and in the testimony of those who were there. What began as a site for extracting stone became a place where the earth itself was reshaped to serve the ambitions of war. It is in this transformation that the story of Mauthausen takes on its full weight, a reminder that history is not only written in the open, but also in the places deliberately hidden from view, where the human cost is both greatest and most easily concealed. From the moment one approaches Mauthausen, its position commands the landscape. Set high on a hill, it was built to dominate, its walls of cold grey stone merging into the rock beneath as though the fortress had grown from the earth itself. The choice of location was strategic, not only for access to the nearby quarries but for the psychological power it exerted. From its height, the view stretched far over the countryside, yet for those within its walls, the world beyond seemed impossibly distant. The outer perimeter was more than just a barrier. It was a statement. Electrified barbed wire ran in taut lines along the top of the walls, gleaming in the light, a constant reminder that even the smallest attempt to cross would be met with immediate danger. At intervals, guard towers rose above the walls, each one manned and armed, offering clear sight lines to every corner of the grounds and the hills beyond. When it was first constructed, the camp consisted of only a few barracks, arranged with military precision. These early structures were utilitarian, meant for function over comfort, their wooden frames and sparse interiors standing in stark contrast to the imposing stone walls outside. But as the demands of the war grew, so too did the camp. What began as a small, contained site steadily expanded, swallowing more of the hilltop until it covered 15 hectares, a space large enough to house not only the prisoners and their work areas, but also the infrastructure to keep the entire operation running. The additions were not random. Each new building, road, and storage facility was part of a carefully planned network that supported both the visible and hidden purposes of the camp. Walking through Mauthausen during those years would have been to move through a place of layered realities. In Moria, the quarries cut deep into the hillside, the steps carved by countless boots carrying granite blocks. In another, the barracks stood in rows, their interiors lined with narrow bunks and bare walls. And in yet another, the hidden entrances to tunnels descended into the earth, leading to workshops where metal and machinery replaced the stone and dust of the quarry. All of this was enclosed by the fortress walls, which from the outside seemed simply defensive, but from within created a complete sense of isolation. The architecture itself played a role in the daily experience of those inside. The walls, built from the very granite extracted nearby, were thick and high, absorbing the sounds of the camp so that the outside world heard little of what went on within. The electrified wire along the top hummed faintly, its presence both audible and visual, a line that could not be crossed. The guard towers, with their small windows and heavy silhouettes, were always within sight no matter where one stood, a reminder that movement was constantly observed. Even the gates were designed to reinforce control, heavy, iron-bound, and opening only when overseers decided. As the camp expanded, its layout grew more complex. Roads connected the quarries to storage areas, barracks to kitchens, administrative offices to workshops. Watchtowers were added to new sections, their height ensuring that no blind spots existed. Floodlights were mounted to cut through the darkness at night, turning the grounds into a place where shadows had nowhere to hide. The atmosphere this created was one of constant surveillance and control, a physical environment that mirrored the strict order and hierarchy imposed within. What set Mauthausen apart from other sites was how completely it embodied both the practical and the symbolic purposes of its construction. The fortress-like design was not only meant to prevent escape but also to project strength and inevitability. To arrive here was to be confronted by walls that seemed immovable, by structures that appeared as permanent as the hill they stood on. For the prisoners, this was a visual message as much as a physical one. The idea that nothing here could be changed, that the walls would outlast them. The expansion to a 15-hectare complex also meant that Mauthausen could operate on a scale far beyond its original scope. It was no longer just a place of forced labor in the quarries. It became a hub that connected to the underground factories, the administrative planning for projects across the region, and the logistical systems that moved materials and manpower where they were needed. This growth brought more prisoners, more guards, and more resources into the camp, each layer adding to the complexity of its operation. The original few barracks were now part of a much larger landscape, one in which each element served a specific function within the whole. Yet even as it grew, the sense of containment never lessened. The high walls ensured that the horizon was always seen through stone and wire. The guard towers meant that any movement, whether carrying stone, walking to the workshops, or simply crossing the yard, was observed. The architecture dictated not only the physical space, but also the mental boundaries of those inside. The layout, the fortifications, and the ever-present surveillance combined to create an environment where freedom seemed less like a distant possibility and more like something that had never existed at all. Today, those same walls still stand, weathered but intact, a silent witness to the years when Mauthausen operated at the height of its capacity. The stones, quarried by the very people held within, now hold the weight of memory. They mark the boundary between the world outside and the world that once existed inside, a world designed with precision, built for control, and expanded to serve purposes far beyond what its earliest structures suggested. The fortress on the hill remains, not as the impenetrable stronghold it was once meant to be, but as a reminder of how places can be shaped to hold both the visible and the unseen stories of the past. For those brought to Mauthausen, the journey did not end at the fortress gates. It merely shifted into its most immediate and personal trial. After arrival, there was no pause to recover from the journey, no moment to collect oneself. The first step was to strip away every sign of identity. Prisoners were led to processing areas where the guards, efficient and unyielding, set about their tasks. Hair was shaved off entirely, not a strand spared, leaving heads bare and skin raw. This act, mechanical as it was, carried an unspoken message. Whatever you were before stepping inside these walls no longer mattered here. From there, the next ordeal awaited. Prisoners were herded into shower rooms where water temperatures swung to extreme, scalding heat that burned against the skin, followed by icy torrents that cut through to the bone. The change was abrupt, shocking, and deliberate, part of a system designed to disorient and strip away the last reserves of physical comfort. There was no predictability, only the certainty that whatever came next would leave the body weaker than before. Once the showers were over, there was no warm towel, no rest. Instead, the new arrivals were issued thin, coarse uniforms that offered little protection from the seasons. They were then moved into quarantine areas, not places of healing or recovery, but holding spaces where conditions were harsh and resources scarce. Quarantine meant confinement in overcrowded rooms, the air heavy and stale, the sense of time distorted by monotony and deprivation. The stated purpose was to prevent illness from spreading, but the reality was that many left quarantine in worse condition than when they entered. From the very first day, food was limited to rations that could not sustain a healthy body for long. Around 1,500 calories a day, a portion barely enough for survival, and far less than what was needed for the heavy labor demanded. The bread was often coarse and dense, the soup thin and watery, the small scraps of vegetables or potatoes hardly enough to provide nourishment. Hunger was constant, a dull ache that never left, shaping every thought and movement. Meals were consumed quickly, not only because of hunger but because there was no luxury of lingering over them. Sleep, too, was rationed in its own way. Nights were short, broken by roll calls that could stretch into hours, or by sudden disturbances that kept everyone on edge. The barracks offered little comfort: narrow bunks stacked in tiers, thin blankets, and no space to move freely. Rest was always incomplete, the body never fully recovering from the day's demands before being called upon to face another. Over time, this constant lack of sleep wore down not just the body but the mind, leaving prisoners in a haze of exhaustion where even the simplest task required effort. And woven into every moment was the reality of constant mistreatment. It could come in the form of shouted orders, sudden inspections, or arbitrary punishments that seemed to have no cause beyond the will of those in charge. It was in the blows struck without warning, the humiliations inflicted in front of others, the deliberate setting of impossible tasks. There was no part of daily life untouched by this atmosphere of intimidation and control. This routine, the shaving, the extremes of temperature, the confinement, the hunger, the sleeplessness, the unending mistreatment was not accidental. It was part of a deliberate process that began the moment the gates closed behind a new arrival. It was designed to weaken, to erode both the physical strength and the inner sense of self. The camp's layout and structure, its fortress walls and watchtowers, created the physical boundaries. These intake procedures and daily deprivations created the mental ones. And yet, within this system, people found ways to endure. Sometimes it was in the sharing of a crust of bread, in whispered conversations during rare moments of privacy, in the unspoken agreements to help each other survive another day. These acts were small, often invisible to those in power. But for the prisoners they were vital threads of humanity that resisted the attempt to reduce them to nothing more than laborers in a vast and merciless machine. The same walls that had seen granite blocks hauled from the quarries and secret weapons assembled underground now contained these daily struggles. The fortress on the hill was not just a place of monumental stone and guarded perimeters. It was a place where survival itself became an act of defiance. The routine of intake and deprivation was as much a part of the camp's operation as the machinery in the tunnels or the carts in the quarry. It kept the system running by breaking down those within it, by ensuring that every day began and ended with reminders of control. Today, when visitors walk through the remains of Mauthausen, the shower rooms and quarantine barracks still stand, their walls silent but marked by what they once held. The spaces are empty now, but the design remains clear, the controlled flow from one area to another, the cramped rooms, the absence of comfort. The stones and timbers bear no sound, yet they hold the weight of countless footsteps that passed through under the same routine. To stand there is to feel, in some measure, the deliberate order in which events unfolded. The way each step from arrival to confinement was calculated to strip away strength and replace it with submission. It is within this understanding that the story of Mauthausen takes on its full shape. The fortress walls, the quarries, the tunnels, these were the physical framework. But it was in the everyday ordeals, repeated over and over, that the camp exerted its most immediate power. The history is not only in the grand scale of construction or the hidden factories, but also in the personal scale of each individual forced to endure the same relentless process from their first day to their last. Deep within the unforgiving landscape of Mauthausen, the granite quarry stood as a grim monument to human suffering and endurance. Each day, prisoners were forced into back-breaking labor, carrying massive stones weighing anywhere from 30 to 50 kilograms up a steep, relentless staircase consisting of 186 uneven steps carved into the quarry's face. These steps were more than just a path. They were a gauntlet, a cruel test of strength and will, where the weight of the stones pressed down not only on the bodies but on the spirit of every man forced to climb. The journey up those steps was a slow, agonizing struggle, made even more perilous by exhaustion, hunger, and the constant threat of violence. The prisoners had no choice but to hurry, to keep moving under the watchful eyes of the guards who patrolled the quarry. Their presence a constant reminder that slowing down was met with brutal punishment. Many carried their burdens until their legs buckled, or they collapsed from sheer fatigue, falling onto the steps and dragging down those behind them in a chain reaction of pain and injury. Those who faltered were often beaten, pushed, or left to suffer without aid. Beyond the physical torment of the quarry labor, there was a darker terror that cast a shadow over the entire site. The infamous parachutist wall, this towering cliff, looming over the quarry, was a place of execution disguised as choice. Prisoners were forced to climb the steep face and then ordered to jump. The guards told them that if they refused, they would be beaten to death. Faced with such a choice, some chose the leap, falling to their deaths below, while others endured unspeakable violence. The parachutist wall was both a symbol and a method of control, an ever-present reminder that death was never far from the quarry floor. The stone carried by the prisoners was destined for the very walls and structures that enclosed the camp itself, as well as for the monumental projects planned by the Nazi regime. The irony was brutal. The prisoners were forced to provide the building materials for a fortress designed to imprison and control them. A cruel cycle of exploitation and dehumanization. Every block of granite represented not only physical labor, but also the erasure of individual dignity. The quarry's environment was harsh and unforgiving. Dust filled the air, coating skin and lungs, while the constant noise of chisels striking rock and the shouts of guards created a relentless atmosphere of stress and fear. The prisoners worked in groups, herded like cattle, their movements tightly controlled, their every step monitored. The SS officers assigned to the quarry were trained not only to oversee labor, but to punish and intimidate, ensuring that exhaustion and despair were constant companions. In this place, death was not only a result of the physical demands, but also of the psychological warfare waged daily. The knowledge that the parachutist wall awaited, that a misstep could mean falling or being thrown off the cliff, hung over every prisoner's mind. The fear was compounded by the reality that those who did not collapse under the stone's weight still faced beatings, starvation, and isolation. Survival was a daily struggle, measured not only by endurance but by the smallest acts of resistance and solidarity among the prisoners. Stories from survivors recount moments of desperation and fleeting hope amid the quarry's cruelty. Some prisoners found ways to support each other, sharing scraps of food or offering a hand to steady someone struggling up the steps. Others quietly sabotaged the work, slightly damaging stones or tools in ways that slowed production without drawing immediate suspicion. These acts, though small, were vital assertions of humanity within a system designed to strip it away. The quarry and the parachutist wall stand today as silent witnesses to this brutal history. The steps, carved deep into the granite, still bear the marks of countless feet, a physical reminder of the endurance and suffering endured there. The cliff remains a stark monument to the lives lost, its sheer face a place of memory and mourning. In understanding the role of the quarry within Mauthausen, it becomes clear how deeply intertwined labor, punishment, and death were in the camp's operation. The physical landscape was shaped not only by the natural stone, but by the human cost embedded in every block carried and every step climbed. It is a story of endurance pushed to its limits, of cruelty met with quiet resilience, and of a place where every stone tells a story of suffering and survival. Within the walls of Mauthausen, a contrasting narrative was carefully constructed, one that was preserved in images that masked the harsh reality behind the fortress gates. The SS photographers, tasked with documenting the camp, captured scenes that appeared orderly and disciplined, giving the outside world a sanitized vision of what was happening inside. Rows of prisoners lined up neatly, workers engaged in their labor with apparent focus and efficiency, and guards standing watch in formal poses. These images were intended to serve a propaganda purpose, showcasing the camp as a place of strict but fair order, a part of the Third Reich's grand and methodical plan. But these photographs told only part of the story, a curated glimpse designed to hide the daily violence and suffering that the prisoners endured. The reality was far harsher than what these carefully framed shots suggested. Behind the smiles that never truly reached the eyes, behind the precise formations, was a system steeped in brutality. The SS camera lens was a tool not for truth but for control, shaping perception while masking the horrors of forced labor, starvation, torture, and death. In the midst of this orchestrated narrative, a quiet rebellion took shape. Some prisoners, aware of the power of these images to document history and expose lies, risked everything to save them from destruction. When orders came down to eliminate evidence of the camp's true nature, a small group of detainees managed to hide around 2,000 photographs, secret negatives that captured moments the SS did not want the world to see. These preserved images became a silent testimony, a record of life inside Mauthausen beyond the staged scenes. The clandestine efforts to save these photographs were acts of courage and defiance, Prisoners hid the negatives in walls, buried them in the earth, or concealed them in whatever hiding places they could find within the camp's confines. Each preserved image was a fragment of truth, a piece of history safeguarded against obliteration. This collection now serves as a crucial window into the camp's reality, revealing moments of despair, resistance, and the daily grind under an oppressive regime. Among the images preserved are haunting portraits of prisoners, their faces marked by exhaustion, fear, and sometimes a flicker of resilience. There are photographs of work parties in the quarries and factories, showing the grueling conditions and the physical toll on those forced to labor. Some images depict as officers overseeing the prisoners, masks of authority and menace. Others capture scenes of death and abandonment, bodies left behind, evidence of the lethal consequences of the camp's relentless demands. These photos contrast sharply with the official narrative, while this sought to present Mauthausen as a model camp orderly, productive, even benevolent in its purpose. The hidden images tell a story of cruelty and despair. The photographs reveal the gap between appearance and reality, exposing the propaganda for what it was. They remind us that history is often shaped by who controls the narrative, but also that truth can survive even in the darkest places when there are those willing to risk everything to preserve it. The preservation of these photographs also reflects a deeper human desire to remember and bear witness. In a place designed to erase identity and crush spirit, the act of saving these images was a way to assert existence, to ensure that the stories of those who suffered and died would not be forgotten. It was a refusal to allow their lives and experiences to be reduced to mere numbers or forgotten entirely. Today, these photographs are housed in museums and archives, their power undiminished by time. They serve as a stark reminder of Mauthausen's true nature, providing a visual counterpoint to the official accounts and a potent educational tool. Visitors to memorial sites study these images to understand the lived reality behind the fortress walls, to connect faces to stories, and to confront the depths of human cruelty and endurance. In this light, the photographs and the prisoners' efforts to save the hidden negatives become more than historical artifacts. They become symbols of the battle over memory itself. The camp's oppressive environment sought to silence and erase. But through these images, voices from the past continue to speak. They tell stories of suffering and resistance, of the brutality endured and the courage displayed, ensuring that Mauthausen's legacy is remembered honestly and fully. This chapter in Mauthausen's history underscores the importance of preserving truth amid attempts to distort it. It highlights the power of images not only to deceive but also to reveal, depending on who holds the lens and who safeguards what is captured. The hidden photographs are a testament to the resilience of human memory and the enduring need to confront history with clarity and honesty, no matter how difficult the truths may be. Beneath the imposing walls of Mauthausen, hidden away from the gaze of the outside world, lay the darkest and most harrowing secrets of the camp torture chambers. Execution rooms, gas chambers, and crematoria, all designed to extinguish human life with cold efficiency. These underground facilities were the starkest reminder that Mauthausen was not merely a place of forced labor and suffering, but a calculated instrument of systematic murder. Entering these shadowed spaces meant confronting the very machinery of death. The torture chambers were rooms where prisoners endured unspeakable cruelties, designed to break their bodies and spirits. It was here that many were held captive, subjected to relentless interrogations, physical abuse, and psychological torment. The echoes of screams and despair seemed to linger in these walls, silent now but heavy with the weight of past horrors. Adjacent to the torture chambers were the execution rooms, stark and methodical in their purpose. Men and women brought here faced death in its most direct and personal form, a bullet to the head or other means, carried out swiftly to instill fear and suppress any thought of resistance among the prisoners. These executions were routine, part of a brutal system where life was cheap and death was a constant shadow. Perhaps the most chilling of all were the gas chambers, concealed within the camp's underground bunkers. Unlike the forced labor and harsh conditions above, the gas chambers represented a cold, industrialized method of mass murder. Prisoners were led through a series of rooms, each step stripping away the last vestiges of hope. They entered a chamber that appeared to be nothing more than a holding room, only to find that the door behind them sealed shut, locked from the outside. Inside, the deadly gas was released, filling the space with an invisible, little cloud that took the lives of most within minutes. The gas chambers at Mauthausen were responsible for the deaths of approximately 8,000 people, a figure that speaks to the sheer scale of the camp's role in the Holocaust's machinery of death. The victims came from diverse backgrounds, including political prisoners, ethnic minorities, prisoners of war, and others whom the Nazi regime deemed expendable. Following the gassing, the bodies were swiftly removed and transported to the crematoria, where they were burned to ashes, erasing physical traces of the victims and making it harder to account for the true extent of the atrocities committed. The crematoria were places of relentless activity, where the cycle of death was concealed beneath smoke and flame, masking the horrors from those outside the camp's confines. These facilities, hidden underground and away from the more visible parts of the camp, were deliberately kept secret. The Nazis sought to conceal the extent of their crimes, to hide evidence from the advancing Allied forces and the wider world. As the tide of war shifted, orders were given to destroy evidence, but many of these structures survived, standing today as grim memorials to those who perished. Within these dark chambers, the dehumanization that prisoners experienced reached its ultimate expression. Stripped of identity, subjected to torture, forced into endless labor, and then led to a death that was swift and merciless. The victims of Mauthausen endured the full spectrum of human cruelty. Yet, even in the face of such horror, stories of resilience and quiet defiance emerged. Some prisoners, aware of their likely fate, found strength in small acts of solidarity, in sharing words of hope, or simply in bearing witness to the atrocities around them. The existence of these torture and execution spaces is a stark reminder of how industrialized and systematic the process of extermination was during the Holocaust. Mauthausen was not unique in this respect, but the combination of forced labor, brutal living conditions, and the presence of these death chambers made it one of the most feared camps in the Nazi network. The physical architecture of the camp reflected this dual-purpose harsh work above ground and hidden killing machines below. Today, visitors to Mauthausen's memorial sites can walk through these underground spaces, guided by the stories and testimonies of survivors and historians. The silence in these chambers is profound, but it speaks volumes. The stark walls, the metal doors, and the remains of machinery all serve as powerful reminders of the lives lost and the depths of human cruelty. The preserved spaces invite reflection and remembrance, demanding that we confront this painful history honestly and with respect for those who suffered. The knowledge of what transpired in these hidden parts of the camp adds a vital layer of understanding to the overall story of Mauthausen. It is a story not only of labor and endurance, but also of death and destruction engineered with chilling efficiency. The toll of approximately 8,000 people gassed within these chambers is a sobering statistic that underscores the camp's central role in the Holocaust's genocide machinery. In telling this part of Mauthausen's history, we remember those who were silenced and seek to ensure that the lessons of the past are never forgotten. The underground chambers of torture, execution, and cremation stand as a testament to the consequences of hatred and dehumanization, urging present and future generations to uphold the values of humanity, dignity, and justice. Just a few kilometers from the main Mauthausen camp, nestled near another granite quarry, the subcamp of Gusen emerged as a crucial yet harrowing extension of the Nazi machinery. Initially constructed to bring prisoners closer to the stone quarries and thereby improve output, this subcamp quickly evolved into something far more complex and sinister, reflecting the ever-escalating demands of the Third Reich as the war dragged on and resources became scarcer. The landscape around Gusen bore the scars of relentless exploitation, where human lives were treated as expendable cogs in a vast industrial machine. The prisoners marched daily to the quarries, forced to extract granite that was essential not only for the camp's own construction, but also for Hitler's ambitious architectural and military projects. But as the war intensified, the Nazis' priorities shifted. The urgent need for advanced weaponry and the protection of key industrial sites drove the creation of massive underground facilities beneath the very earth these prisoners labored on. Gusen became a center for this dark transformation, where quarry workers found themselves not just hauling stone, but digging tunnels and constructing secret bunkers intended to shelter some of the Third Reich's most advanced military technology. One of the most significant projects to emerge from this subterranean network was the production of the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet-powered fighter aircraft. This jet was a technological marvel of its time, designed to give the Luftwaffe a decisive advantage over Allied air forces. The pressure to complete the underground factories was immense, as Allied bombing raids threatened to destroy above-ground facilities. The Nazis believed that moving production underground would secure the manufacture of these cutting-edge aircraft, safeguarding their hopes to turn the tide of war. The prisoners at Gusen endured appalling conditions as they were forced to build and staff these underground factories. Their labor was relentless, carried out under constant threat of violence, starvation, and exhaustion. Tunnels stretched for kilometers, carved out by hand with rudimentary tools, while many prisoners died from accidents, disease, or sheer exhaustion. The very same quarry that had once been a place of back-breaking stone extraction was transformed into a sprawling network of caverns and workshops, humming with the grim purpose of producing instruments of war. Adding to the deadly significance of Gusen's underground complex was the testing of the V-2 rocket engines, a revolutionary weapon that represented one of the first long-range guided ballistic missiles in history. These 13-ton missiles, powered by liquid fuel engines, were capable of delivering devastating blows hundreds of kilometers away. The Nazis invested heavily in the V-2 program, seeing it as a wonder weapon that could strike Allied cities and military targets with unprecedented speed and power. Within the secret tunnels near Gusen, prisoners were forced to enlarge chambers and construct vertical shafts to facilitate the clandestine assembly and testing of these propulsion units. The work was performed in utter secrecy, with scientists and SS officers observing the tests behind reinforced observation bunkers. The prisoners, meanwhile, toiled under brutal conditions, often unaware of the full extent of what they were building, though they certainly understood that their labor served a deadly purpose. The irony of these projects could not be more cruel. The prisoners were compelled to build and test the very weapons that would bring destruction upon their homelands and themselves. Their suffering fueled the Nazi war machine, and their lives were expendable in the pursuit of technological advancement. Every stone moved, every tunnel dug, every engine tested was a testament to the intersection of human endurance and systematic cruelty. Despite the horrors, some accounts reveal moments of resilience and solidarity among prisoners, secret acts of defiance, the sharing of scant resources, and the mental fortitude required to survive such conditions stand as a testament to human will in the face of unimaginable suffering. Yet, the cost was immense. Thousands perished in these underground factories, victims of the lethal combination of forced labor, malnutrition, disease, and outright execution. Today, remnants of these subterranean facilities remain, silent witnesses to the scale of industrialized cruelty and technological ambition fused within the camp system. The tunnels, chambers, and shafts carved into the earth speak to a history where innovation was shadowed by inhumanity, where the quest for military superiority was stained by the blood of the oppressed. The story of Gusen and its underground factories broadens our understanding of Mauthausen's role during the war, revealing how the camp system extended beyond imprisonment and forced labor into the realm of weapon production and military strategy. It is a chilling reminder of how technological progress can be harnessed for destruction, and how human suffering can be exploited to fuel such ambitions. Remembering this history urges us to reflect not only on the past atrocities, but also on the ethical responsibilities that come with scientific and technological development. The legacy of Gusen's underground factories serves as a powerful call to ensure that advancements are never divorced from humanity and compassion, and that the memory of those who suffered there guides future generations in striving for a more just and humane world. Deep within the hidden tunnels of the Mauthausen and Gusen subcamps, a tragic and bitter irony unfolded as prisoners were forced to build and test components of the V-2 rocket, the world's first long-range ballistic missile. This weapon, capable of striking targets hundreds of kilometers away with devastating force, was a symbol of Nazi technological ambition. But behind its deadly design was a story of human suffering and betrayal that few outside these dark corridors could fully comprehend. The V-2 rocket program was one of the most secretive and advanced military projects of the Third Reich. To protect the production from Allied bombings and maintain a steady supply, the Nazis relocated much of the manufacturing underground. It was here, beneath the earth where sunlight never reached, that prisoners labored under brutal conditions to assemble propulsion units. The heart of these powerful missiles, each component was painstakingly crafted and rigorously tested in secret facilities that prisoners were forced to build with their own hands. For these prisoners, many of whom were political dissidents, prisoners of war, or victims of racial persecution, the cruelest twist lay in the fact that they were unwittingly contributing to the war effort of their oppressors. The very weapons they helped produce were destined to destroy cities, including possibly their own homelands and the nations they identified with. This paradox of forced complicity underlined the utter dehumanization imposed by the Nazi regime, where the prisoners' lives were expendable and their labor a tool of destruction. The work was relentless and dangerous. Prisoners toiled in cramped, dark tunnels with limited food and rest, constantly under threat of violence or execution for the slightest mistake or perceived insubordination. The construction of underground chambers, assembly lines, and vertical shafts for loading and testing the rocket engines demanded immense physical endurance and technical precision. Yet the guards cared little for human cost. Death by exhaustion, accidents, or outright murder was commonplace, a tragic consequence ignored by those who ran the operation. Despite the hardship, the prisoners' efforts were indispensable to the Nazi war machine. The V-2 rocket propulsion units tested in these tunnels represented a leap forward in missile technology, capable of propelling a 13-ton missile at supersonic speeds over distances exceeding 300 kilometers. The rockets were a terrifying weapon of terror, capable of bypassing traditional defenses and striking with deadly accuracy. For the Nazis, the V-2 symbolized hope to reverse their failing fortunes in the war, a technological marvel wrapped in the darkness of forced labor and human misery. Prisoners were often unaware of the full scope of their work, but many understood enough to grasp the tragic reality of their situation. They witnessed the shipment of finished propulsion units out of the tunnels, destined for deployment on battlefronts far from the grim confines of the camp. The rocket engines were sent to launch sites where they would rain destruction upon civilian populations and soldiers alike. The knowledge that they were helping build weapons of mass destruction added a profound layer of psychological torment to their physical suffering. This bitter contradiction, building weapons to kill their own people and allies exemplified the depths of cruelty within the Nazi camp system. Prisoners were reduced to tools, stripped of agency, forced to contribute to a cause that sought to annihilate them and their communities. The V2 project stands as a haunting example of how technological innovation, when divorced from ethics and compassion, can become an instrument of unimaginable devastation. The underground testing sites bore witness not only to scientific progress, but also to the resilience and endurance of those who survived such conditions. Some prisoners found ways to maintain hope and solidarity amid despair, sharing stories, supporting each other, and quietly resisting through acts of mental defiance. Their survival stories are a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure, even when trapped within the machinery of oppression. After the war, the significance of these underground facilities and the prisoners' coerced labor became a critical chapter in understanding the full scope of Nazi atrocities. The V2 rocket program's development was inseparable from the suffering endured by thousands who built and tested its components under duress. Memorials and museums today bear witness to this painful legacy, reminding visitors not only of technological history, but also of the human cost behind it. The story of prisoners forced to build and test V2 rocket propulsion units underlines a vital lesson for future generations: that scientific and technological advancement must never come at the expense of human dignity and rights. It is a stark reminder of what happens when progress is weaponized and human beings are treated as mere resources. Remembering this history honors those who suffered in silence and challenges us to advocate for a world where technology serves peace, justice, and humanity above all else. Not far from the grim tunnels and quarries of Mauthausen and Gesen stood Harrowing Castle, an ominous and chilling sight that played a dark but crucial role in the machinery of Nazi terror. Unlike the forced labor and brutal conditions that characterized much of the camp system, Harrowing Castle was specifically used for a systematic program of extermination aimed at the weakest and sickest prisoners, those whom the Nazis deemed unfit to work or survive. This sinister program, known as Action 14F13, was an extension of the earlier Nazi euthanasia campaign called Action T4, which had already claimed tens of thousands of lives before the war. Originally, Action T4 targeted mentally ill and disabled people across Germany and Austria, operating under a guise of mercy killings to rid society of what the Nazis called life unworthy of life. However, as the war expanded, the program evolved and spread its deadly reach to concentration camps, where the sick and disabled inmates were selected and sent to places like Harrowing Castle for systematic murder. The goal was cold and calculated: to remove those who slowed down the Nazi war machine or were considered burdensome, thus cleansing the camps to maintain efficiency and deadly productivity. Harrowing Castle, a stately building with a history far removed from the horrors inflicted within its walls during the war, was transformed into a killing center. Inside, prisoners who had been deemed too weak or ill to continue labor were brought here under false pretenses. Many believed they were being transferred for medical treatment or recovery, only to find themselves trapped in a place designed for death. The methods employed at Harrowing were chilling in their efficiency. Gas chambers were installed within the castle's basement, where victims were murdered en masse using carbon monoxide. The victims were stripped of their dignity one final time before being led into the gas chambers, their fate sealed in moments. The bodies were then cremated or buried in mass graves, leaving little trace of the atrocities. The scale of the killings at Harrowing was staggering. Thousands of prisoners from Mauthausen and other camps passed through its doors, never to leave alive. Records and prisoner tags recovered after the war have helped historians piece together the identities of many victims, restoring names and stories to those who the Nazis tried to erase completely. The cold bureaucracy of Nazi record-keeping contrasted sharply with the brutal reality of Harrowing's function, revealing a system that masked mass murder behind official documentation and euphemistic language. Despite the horror, Stories of resistance and courage emerged even here. Some prisoners managed to smuggle information about the killings to the outside world or passed warnings along to fellow inmates, risking their lives to shed light on the atrocities. The knowledge of Harthim's true purpose fueled acts of quiet defiance and strengthened the resolve of many to survive against all odds. Harthim Castle's role in Action 14F13 highlights the broader Nazi strategy of dehumanization and extermination that permeated the entire concentration camp system. It was not enough to exploit prisoners for labor. Those who could no longer serve were discarded in the most brutal manner imaginable. This system of selection and extermination was a grim reflection of the Nazi ideology that valued people solely based on their utility to the regime's war efforts. Today, Harthim Castle stands as a memorial and a stark reminder of this dark chapter. Visitors who walk its halls are confronted with the stark contrast between the castle's architectural beauty and the atrocities committed within. Exhibitions and preserved sites within the castle detail the stories of victims and survivors, offering a space for reflection, mourning, and education. The history of Harthim Castle urges us to remember the countless lives lost to a system that sought to eradicate anyone deemed weak or different. It serves as a powerful testament to the consequences of prejudice, hatred, and the perversion of medical ethics for political ends. Most importantly, it challenges us to uphold human dignity and protect the vulnerable in our societies today. By linking the horrors of Harthim with the broader narrative of Mauthausen and its sub-camps, we gain a deeper understanding of the full scope of Nazi atrocities. From forced labor in granite quarries and underground weapons factories to the cold-blooded murders in places like Harthim, the system was designed to exploit, torment, and ultimately destroy millions of lives. This interconnected network of suffering reveals how far-reaching and methodical the Nazi regime was in its quest for domination and racial purity. The memory of Harthim Castle and its victims remains a solemn call to action for all who learn its history. It reminds us that vigilance, education, and compassion are essential in preventing such atrocities from ever happening again. In honoring the victims, we commit to building a world where no human life is deemed worthless and where justice and humanity prevail above hatred and cruelty. As the bitter winter of 1945 tightened its grip on Europe and the war neared its devastating climax, the prisoners of Mauthausen faced one final, desperate test of their courage and will to survive. Among them, in Block 20 of the camp, stood nearly 400 Soviet officers who had endured unimaginable suffering, brutal forced labor, starvation, and relentless abuse. Their spirits, however battered, remained unbroken, and in the face of impending death, they made a desperate attempt to seize freedom, knowing full well the risks involved. The plan was born out of sheer necessity and despair. With food scarce and hope fading, the Soviet officers banded together in a quiet act of defiance. One cold night in February, they took advantage of a momentary lapse in the guards' vigilance, and using whatever tools and cunning they could muster, they attempted to breach the electrified barbed wire that imprisoned them. Wet blankets were thrown over the electrified fences in a calculated move to short-circuit the deadly wires and create a fragile pathway to freedom. This act of courage and desperation, however, was met with brutal force. As the alarms blared and as guards rushed to quell the escape attempt, chaos erupted. The prisoners ran into the freezing night, fighting against exhaustion, hunger, and the merciless pursuit of their captors. Many were captured almost immediately, but a small number managed to slip through the shadows and disappear into the snow-covered forests surrounding the camp. Among these escapees were two young men, Mikhail and Andrei, whose lives would soon intertwine with the bravery and kindness of the local population. The villagers near Mauthausen lived under the constant shadow of fear and repression. Sheltering escapees was an act fraught with peril, punishable by death or brutal reprisals from the Nazi authorities. Yet, despite these risks, some locals found it in their hearts to offer refuge. One such family, the Hackos, harbored Mikhail and Andrei in the basement of their barn, providing them with food, warmth, and the fragile hope of survival. The prisoners remained hidden for 3 long months, a tense silence enveloping the household as the war raged on outside. These acts of humanity shone brightly amid the darkness of the Nazi regime, embodying a quiet resistance that defied oppression. For the Hackos family and others like them, risking everything to protect fugitives was a testament to the enduring power of compassion and solidarity in the face of evil. The escapees, though weakened and traumatized, carried with them not only their own survival, but also the stories and memories of those who had perished in the camp. Tragically, the odds were overwhelmingly against the escapees. Of the nearly 400 Soviet officers who attempted flight from Block 20, only 11 managed to survive the relentless manhunt and the brutal conditions that followed. The rest were recaptured or killed, their desperate bid for freedom cut short by the merciless forces that controlled the camp. Yet, even this small number of survivors represented a triumph of the human spirit, a testament to courage, endurance, and the unyielding will to live. The liberation of the camp by Soviet forces months later marked the end of one of the darkest chapters in human history. But the echoes of those February nights remained vivid in the memories of survivors and witnesses alike. The stories of the escape attempt, the villagers' bravery, and the resilience of those imprisoned remind us that even in the face of overwhelming cruelty, hope and courage can persist. This episode intertwines deeply with the broader narrative of Mauthausen and its subcamps, a story of systematic cruelty, forced labor, and industrialized murder. The desperate escape from Block 20 illuminates the personal, human cost of this system. It is a poignant reminder that behind the statistics and historical records were individuals with dreams, families, and an indomitable desire to survive. Reflecting on this story, we see the profound impact of individual and collective choices made under extreme conditions. The villagers' willingness to risk their lives to help escapees stands as a powerful example of moral courage. It challenges us today to consider how we respond to injustice and suffering in our own world, inspiring us to act with empathy and bravery. The survival of these 11 men, and the shelter offered by locals, offer a glimmer of light amid the overwhelming darkness of the Holocaust. Their stories have become integral to the remembrance of Mauthausen, reminding future generations that even in the bleakest circumstances, humanity can endure and prevail. In honoring their courage, we renew our commitment to never forget the atrocities of the past and to strive for a future where such horrors are never repeated. As the dark clouds of war finally lifted in 1945, the gates of Mauthausen Concentration Camp were thrown open by the liberating Allied forces, revealing scenes of unimaginable suffering and loss. By that, it is estimated that nearly 120,000 men, women, and children had perished within the sprawling 15-hectare complex and its numerous subcamps. Each of those lives lost represents a story cut tragically short, a family forever changed, a community shattered, and a history marked by cruelty and resilience. The liberation of Mauthausen did not erase the horrors endured there, but it did mark a crucial turning point. Survivors emerged from the camp bearing scars both visible and invisible, carrying memories that would fuel efforts to ensure such atrocities would never happen again. The camp itself, once a symbol of terror and oppression, has since become a solemn memorial to those who suffered and died. It stands as a stark reminder of the consequences of hatred, intolerance, and unchecked power. Yet, amid the overwhelming tragedy, there is a complex legacy woven into the fabric of modern history. The forced labor of prisoners in quarries, factories, and underground weapons sites contributed, often unwillingly and under brutal conditions, to technological developments that have since shaped the modern world. From advanced jet aircraft to rocket technology, many innovations trace a painful lineage back to the blood, sweat, and tears of those imprisoned at Mauthausen and its subcamps. This paradox challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about progress and the human cost behind it. Remembering Mauthausen is not simply about recounting historical facts. It is about honoring the lives of those who endured the unimaginable and reaffirming our commitment to human dignity and justice. Their stories remind us of the depths of cruelty humans are capable of, but also of the strength and resilience that can emerge even in the darkest times. As we reflect on this history, it is vital to carry forward the lessons learned to stand firmly against hatred, discrimination, and violence in all forms, and to champion empathy, tolerance, and human rights. By educating ourselves and others about the past, we keep alive the memories of victims and survivors and fortify the values that protect our shared humanity. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the history of Mauthausen Concentration Camp. If you found this story meaningful, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history that matters. Your support helps keep these important stories alive and ensures that the voices of those lost and those who survived are never forgotten. Wishing you all a peaceful night filled with rest and reflection. Sleep well, and until next time, take care.